My beloved child. Before this message reaches its ending, a heart that has carried unbearable regret for far too long will finally speak the words it was too afraid to say when it mattered most. The silence you believed meant the story was over was never the ending. It was only the place where two broken souls lost the courage to find each other again. Someone has spent countless nights wishing they could turn back time, erase every painful mistake, and stand before you with nothing except complete honesty. Listen carefully. This is a fictional story about love, regret, forgiveness, and the possibility of one last chance, written to touch the heart rather than describe real events. There was a season when your soulmate believed that loving you from a distance would somehow hurt less than standing before you and admitting every fear hidden inside their heart. They convinced themselves that walking away was an act of protection, believing that if they disappeared first, they would never have to experience the unbearable pain of watching your love slowly fade. What they never understood was that leaving did not protect either of you. It simply created a silence so heavy that every passing day became another reminder of everything that had been left unfinished. The world continued moving forward exactly as it always had, but inside their heart, time seemed to stop on the very day they watched your presence disappear from their life. Every sunrise reminded them of another morning they could no longer greet you. Every sunset carried the weight of another opportunity forever lost, and every quiet night became a prison where memories returned one after another without asking permission, refusing to let them forget the person who had once become the safest place they had ever known. They tried everything they could to convince themselves that they had made the right decision. They buried themselves in responsibilities, surrounded themselves with unfamiliar faces, forced themselves to smile during conversations that meant nothing to them, and pretended that happiness was slowly returning. But no matter how many people entered their life, every connection felt incomplete because none of them carried the comfort your presence once gave so effortlessly. They laughed while secretly feeling empty. They celebrated moments that should have brought joy, yet every celebration ended with the same painful realization that the one person they truly wished was standing beside them was nowhere to be found. They learned that pretending to move on is much easier than actually healing, because healing demands honesty, and honesty would have required admitting that they had walked away from the greatest blessing they had ever received. Don't skip. There were nights when sleep refused to visit them because every time they closed their eyes, another memory found its way back into their heart. They remembered conversations that once seemed ordinary but now felt priceless. They remembered the kindness hidden inside your smallest gestures, the patience you showed even when life became difficult, the dreams you once shared together, and the promises neither of you imagined would ever remain unfinished. They realized that the moments they had once taken for granted had quietly become the memories they treasured most. If they had known those ordinary days would one day become impossible to relive, they would have held on to every second with greater care, spoken every loving word without hesitation, and never allowed fear to become louder than the truth living inside their heart. Unfortunately, wisdom often arrives only after loss has already taught its hardest lesson, and by then, all they could do was carry the unbearable weight of regret while wondering if forgiveness had already slipped beyond their reach. Every passing month changed them in ways they never expected. Pride slowly disappeared. Anger quietly faded. The excuses they once used to justify leaving no longer sounded convincing, even to themselves. They stopped blaming circumstances, stopped blaming timing, stopped blaming misunderstandings, because deep inside they finally understood that none of those things had truly destroyed the relationship. What damaged everything was the decision to remain silent when honesty was needed most. One honest conversation could have prevented years of loneliness, yet fear had stolen that opportunity before either of you realized how precious it truly was. That realization became the burden they carried everywhere they went, and no amount of success, money, recognition, or distraction could silence the voice constantly reminding them that the greatest loss of their life was never something they were forced to give up. It was someone they willingly walked away from while believing they still had unlimited time to return. Don't skip. As the years continued to pass, something unexpected began happening inside them. Instead of asking whether they deserved another chance, they started asking whether they had the courage to become the person who could truly honor the love they had once been given. They understood that asking for forgiveness means very little if the heart asking for it has never changed. So they allowed every painful lesson to reshape them. They became more patient, more honest, more willing to listen instead of assuming, more willing to admit mistakes instead of defending them, and little by little they became someone they wished they had been from the very beginning. Yet despite every change, one question continued following them through every season of life. If they ever stood before you again, would you recognize the person they had become, or would the pain of yesterday forever hide the truth of who they were today? Don't skip. There came a moment when they could no longer hide behind the excuse that life had simply moved on. Every road they traveled, every unfamiliar city they visited, every crowded room they entered somehow led them back to the same quiet realization that the only place their heart had ever truly rested was beside you. They stopped searching for signs that would justify staying away because the truth had become impossible to ignore. Distance had never erased their love. Time had never buried your memory. Silence had never convinced their heart to choose someone else. Instead, every passing day only revealed how deeply your presence had become woven into every part of their life. They finally understood that the greatest mistake they ever made was believing that real love could simply be forgotten if they stayed busy long enough, because the heart remembers what the mind desperately tries to erase. The regret they carried was no longer loud or dramatic. It became something even heavier. It became quiet. It followed them during peaceful mornings, ordinary afternoons, and lonely evenings. It appeared in the smallest moments when they least expected it. Watching two strangers laughing together reminded them of the joy they once shared with you. Seeing someone waiting patiently for another person reminded them of the promises they never kept. Even hearing your favorite song unexpectedly playing somewhere was enough to leave them standing completely still while memories flooded back with overwhelming force. They realized that love never truly disappeared. It simply waited beneath the surface, patiently surviving every season until the heart was finally brave enough to face the truth. Listen to this carefully. There was one particular evening that changed everything inside them. It was not a grand event. There was no miracle, no dramatic announcement, and no extraordinary sign. It was simply a quiet moment when they found an old message they had never been able to delete. They read every word slowly, remembering the hope that once lived inside those conversations, remembering the laughter, the dreams, the promises, and even the little disagreements that now seemed painfully insignificant compared to losing you altogether. By the time they reached the final message, tears quietly filled their eyes because they realized something they had spent years refusing to admit. You had never stopped loving them when everything fell apart. You had simply become exhausted from carrying a relationship that only one person seemed willing to fight for. That realization shattered every excuse they had hidden behind, because for the first time they saw the story from your side instead of their own. Don't skip. From that day forward, they stopped asking themselves whether fate had separated you. Instead, they began asking a far more painful question. What if the distance had been created by choices that could have been different? What if one honest conversation, one apology, one moment of humility could have completely rewritten your story? Those questions haunted them because they finally understood that love often dies not because two people stop caring, but because fear speaks louder than honesty and pride becomes stronger than compassion. They wished with all their heart that they could return to that single moment when everything first began slipping away. They would choose different words. They would choose patience instead of anger, understanding instead of assumptions, and honesty instead of silence. But life does not allow anyone to rewrite yesterday. It only offers the opportunity to become someone better today. As they changed, something unexpected also happened. They stopped dreaming about receiving forgiveness only because it would ease their own pain. Instead, they genuinely hoped that you had found peace, even if that peace no longer included them. Real love had slowly replaced selfishness. They realized that loving someone means wanting their happiness even when it costs your own comfort. Yet no matter how selfless they tried to become, one quiet hope refused to disappear. Deep inside, they still dreamed that perhaps one day they would have the opportunity to stand before you, look into your eyes without hiding behind pride, and finally speak the words that had remained trapped inside their heart for far too long. Don't skip. If that day ever came, they promised themselves they would not arrive carrying excuses. They would not blame circumstances, timing, family, distance, or anyone else. They would simply stand before you with complete honesty and say, "I was wrong. I let fear make decisions that love should have made. I believed I had endless time to fix what I had broken. But every day without you taught me how precious even a single moment beside you truly was. I cannot erase the pain I caused, and I cannot demand another chance. All I can offer is a heart that has been completely transformed by every lesson I learned after losing you. If your heart has already found another path, I will respect it forever. But if there is even the smallest space where hope still lives, would spend the rest of my life proving that my actions can finally become as sincere as the love I should have shown from the very beginning." Those words were never rehearsed to impress you. They were born from years of quiet reflection, countless nights of regret, and the painful understanding that some people only recognize the value of a priceless gift after they have already let it slip through their hands. And so, with every passing sunrise, they carried only one prayer in their heart, not that time would magically erase the past, but that if life ever allowed your paths to cross again, they would finally have the courage to love you with the honesty, patience, and devotion you had deserved all along. Don't skip. As the days continued to pass, they slowly accepted something that once seemed impossible to admit. Love was never meant to be proven only through beautiful words spoken during happy moments. Real love reveals itself after everything falls apart. It is measured by the willingness to accept responsibility without demanding forgiveness, by the courage to remain honest even when honesty brings tears instead of comfort, and by the strength to keep hoping without expecting anything in return. For the first time in their life, they stopped imagining what they wanted to hear from you and began wondering what you must have needed to hear during the moments when your heart was breaking. That single thought changed everything inside them. They realized that while they had been protecting themselves from disappointment, you had been carrying the unbearable weight of unanswered questions, silent nights, and a goodbye that never truly made sense. The more they thought about your pain, the more they understood that their greatest regret was not losing the relationship itself, but failing to protect the heart that had trusted them so completely. There were evenings when they would sit alone with nothing except old memories, allowing every forgotten detail to return one by one. They remembered the way your voice softened whenever you spoke about your dreams. They remembered the hope in your eyes whenever you imagined a future that included both of you. They remembered promises whispered during quiet conversations, promises that once felt unbreakable but eventually became scattered beneath the weight of fear and misunderstanding. Every memory carried two emotions at the same time. Gratitude because scattered beneath the weight of fear and misunderstanding. Every memory carried two emotions at the same time. Gratitude because those moments had been real, and heartbreak because they had failed to cherish them while they still had the chance. They finally understood that the most precious chapters of life often seem ordinary while they are happening, only becoming priceless after they have already become memories that can never be lived again. Don't skip. One morning they looked into the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. It was not because their appearance had changed, but because the heart behind those eyes no longer belonged to the same person who had once walked away believing silence was easier than vulnerability. Every painful lesson had slowly removed another layer of pride. Every lonely season had taught another lesson about patience. Every sleepless night had replaced another excuse with responsibility. They had become someone who no longer wanted to win arguments, prove themselves right, or protect an image of strength. They simply wanted to become the kind of person who would never again allow fear to destroy something beautiful. That transformation did not happen overnight. It was built through countless quiet moments when no one else was watching, moments when they chose honesty instead of denial and humility instead of self-justification. Sometimes they imagined what would happen if life unexpectedly brought the two of you face to face again. They no longer pictured dramatic speeches or perfect endings. Instead, they imagined something much simpler. They imagined quietly standing before you without pretending that the past never happened. They imagined looking into your eyes with complete sincerity and allowing silence to exist for a moment, not because they had nothing to say, but because some emotions are too deep to rush. Then, with a voice carrying every lesson learned through years of regret, they would tell you that losing you became the greatest teacher their heart had ever known. They would explain that every achievement felt incomplete because the one person they wished could witness those moments was missing. They would admit that no amount of success had ever filled the empty place your absence created, because some people are not replaced by time, distance, or someone new. They become part of the soul itself. Don't skip. They often wondered whether you had healed completely or whether a small part of your heart still remembered the love you once shared together. They never wanted your life to pause because of them. In fact, they prayed that peace had found you even during the seasons when they were too afraid to reach out. But hope is a quiet thing. It survives even when reason tells it to disappear. Deep inside, they continued carrying one small dream that refused to fade. They dreamed that if destiny ever allowed your paths to cross once more, they would not waste that opportunity with hesitation. This time they would speak every truth before fear had the chance to silence them. This time they would choose transparency instead of confusion, patience instead of pride, and love instead of running away from the very thing that had once made life feel complete. The greatest lesson they learned was surprisingly simple. Second chances are not gifts automatically given because someone feels regret. They are earned through genuine change, unwavering consistency, and the willingness to accept whatever answer follows. That is why they stopped trying to control the future. They could not force forgiveness, demand another beginning, or erase yesterday. All they could do was become someone whose actions reflected the promises their words could never fully express. If life granted another opportunity, they would treasure it with everything they had. If it did not, they would still carry gratitude for having known a love powerful enough to transform the person they became. And somewhere deep within their heart, one gentle whisper remained alive every single day. If tomorrow offered even one final chance to stand before you, they would no longer waste a single heartbeat hiding the truth. They would simply say, "I never stopped loving you, and if your heart can ever find room for me again, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to question my love again." Don't skip. From that moment forward, every new sunrise carried a different meaning for them. They no longer woke up wondering how to forget you. Instead, they woke up asking themselves a single question that quietly reshaped every decision they made. If life unexpectedly gives me one last opportunity to stand before the person I love, will I finally be ready to become the person they always deserved? That question became their daily motivation. It changed the way they spoke to others, the way they handled disappointment, the way they responded to conflict, and even the way they viewed themselves. They realized that true transformation does not happen because someone hopes to win another chance. It happens because the heart can no longer tolerate living as the person who once allowed fear to destroy something so precious. Every lesson became another step toward becoming someone whose love was no longer based on emotion alone, but on patience, honesty, loyalty, and quiet consistency. There were still moments when loneliness returned without warning. A familiar place, an unexpected melody, or even the changing seasons could awaken memories they believed had finally settled. During those moments, they did not run away anymore. They allowed themselves to remember everything. They remembered the laughter that once filled ordinary afternoons, the dreams that both of you carefully built together, the promises whispered when the future still felt certain, and even the difficult conversations that now seemed so small compared to the emptiness left behind. Every memory carried a lesson they wished they had understood much sooner. Love was never asking for perfection. It was only asking for honesty, presence, and the courage to stay even when life became difficult. They finally understood that relationships are rarely destroyed by one dramatic event. More often, they slowly fade because two people stop sharing the truth hidden inside their hearts until silence becomes louder than love itself. Don't skip. One quiet evening, they found themselves writing a letter they were never sure would be delivered. It was not written to persuade you or to erase the past. It was simply the most honest conversation they had ever allowed themselves to have. Every sentence carried the weight of years they could never reclaim. They wrote about the moments they wished they had protected more carefully. They admitted every mistake without softening the truth. They confessed that they had mistaken emotional distance for strength, believing that hiding vulnerability would somehow keep them safe. Instead, it had left them standing alone with a heart full of words that arrived far too late. As the letter grew longer, they realized they were no longer writing only to you. They were also writing to the version of themselves that had once been too afraid to fight for the love placed in front of them. By the time they reached the final page, tears quietly fell because every sentence carried one undeniable truth. If they had loved with the wisdom they possessed now, your story together might have been completely different. For a long time, they questioned whether they even deserved to hope anymore. Regret has a way of convincing people that yesterday defines tomorrow forever. But somewhere deep within their heart, another voice gently reminded them that people are capable of changing when they are willing to face uncomfortable truths. They could not rewrite history, but they could ensure that the same mistakes would never be repeated again. That realization gave them a quiet kind of peace. It was not the excitement of believing everything would magically work out. It was the calm confidence that comes from knowing they had finally become honest with themselves. Whether your paths crossed again or remained forever separate, they would never again allow fear to silence love. Don't skip. If fate ever allowed one final conversation between you, they imagined it would be nothing like the dramatic scenes people often dream about. There would be no perfect speech capable of erasing years of hurt, no magical moment where every wound disappeared in an instant. Instead, there would simply be two hearts standing in the same place after traveling through very different storms. They would look at you with gratitude rather than expectation, because meeting you had forever changed the person they became. And if they were given the opportunity to speak, they would not ask you to forget the pain or pretend the past never happened. They would only ask you to see the truth that now lived inside their heart, a truth shaped by regret, refined through growth, and strengthened by the understanding that genuine love is proven not by promises made during easy moments, but by the quiet choices a person continues making long after everything has fallen apart. As they walked forward into an uncertain future, they carried no guarantees, no certainty, and no expectation that life would unfold exactly as they hoped. Yet one thing remained absolutely unshaken. If tomorrow ever placed you in front of them again, there would be no hesitation, no hidden feelings, and no silence. They would choose honesty from the very first moment, because they had finally learned that the greatest risk is not opening your heart. The greatest risk is remaining silent until the opportunity to speak has disappeared forever. And with that truth resting gently inside their soul, they continued moving forward, believing that even if destiny writes its own ending, a heart transformed by love is never the same heart that once walked away.